sorry, I just realized I had my computer audio turned all the way down. Howdy.
No worries. Thanks so much for coming on. I know it's kind of last
Yeah,
minute.
no, not at all. Just you said 2 p.m. and I arrogantly assumed my time, so
Come
I was
on.
in the middle of a workout and I only realized afterwards that you had messaged me. So
I know
if
you're
I
just really
sound
nervous
sweaty,
to. No, it's just that you're nervous to talk to me, and it's okay. No big deal, really.
don't blow my cope. What's up?
Yeah. Well, I watched your analysis yesterday of the discussion I had with Shoe on Head, and I really liked it. I felt like you were extremely fair in it. Um,
Thank you. I try.
yeah. I
I
guess
like
that.
you both, so I don't come in with hard bias, of course.
Right, right, right. No, I got that. I thought maybe we could just kind of go over some of the stuff we disagreed on just briefly. Because I also was thinking a little bit more about some of the questions you posed too, um, particularly the one like, if we could kill the billionaires and that would fix the problem, would I be in favor of it?
Uh-huh.
And I mean, I guess so. Ultimately, sure, but the like the practical element of the way I'd want to go about that, I would want it to be more of like a put them through a trial or something. Like, would they need to be killed or could they just be incarcerated?
Yeah, so for me, like I don't actually think that the act of killing billion, hypothetically, of course, we're very much talking in the purview of
Hypotheticals here.
video games and Roblox here, but like
Right.
realistically, the process of securing a different system has very little to do with punishing or otherwise harming the people in charge of this one, and has everything to do with setting up the incentive structures to make the next one work. So for me, it's not so much about the practicality of it; it's more about the general nature of stochastic violence, because I'm of the opinion that it all fits on a sliding scale. If you take something like Black Lives Matter, for example, which is a movement that I generally support,
Hmm.
it's mostly been galvanized through anti-cop rhetoric. And a lot of that anti-cop rhetoric, by the way, it's not like violent in nature,
Right.
saying yeah, saying like fuck cops or whatever. That's not calling for their death or anything. But
Hmm.
invariably, people will act on that assumption, and there have been cops killed as a product of BLM. We
Right.
acknowledge this with the right as well. Like when Tucker Carlson says stuff like, um, did Americans ask to have their way of life changed by this demographic replacement? Like, he's not calling for violence, but we know that type of rhetoric does spawn stochastic violence just because of what it implies. So
So
for
what do
me, the
you, sorry
question,
to
oh,
interrupt
sorry.
you, but just out of curiosity, what do you mean by stochastic violence? Do you want to explain that just a little bit?
Yeah, in that the stuff that you say can inspire people to act violently without directly calling for it or naming any individual names.
Okay, got it.
So like the Great Replacement stuff or like the Trump big lie stuff has led to stochastic terrorism even without like a direct call for
Okay,
people to act on it.
that makes sense. Gotcha.
So for me, I guess the main question is, in light of the fact that it seems like basically any big social push is going to inspire some stochastic violence, or at least it might, just as a product of how people respond to social antagonism. How do you best respond to it, and what can you do to move people who think that way over to a more constructive way of voicing their antagonism?
Right. And I think that we agree with a lot of that too, with we want to move people to, like, I understand that we do have a little bit of a different like ideological goal at the end of the day. I can recognize that and I'm okay with that. But like I think that we can also agree that like when people feel resentment towards the upper or I guess we'd say the bourgeois, if they're feeling
Mhm.
resentment towards that class, then we would want them to channel that in an effective way, which in my mind would be like pushing for policy and more regulation, closing tax loopholes, stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely like an immediate pragmatic way of handling things. When things get bad enough, violence and the threat of violence are more likely to affect social change. When things are stable, that's less so.
Hmm.
So, I mean, if we were living in a system that was legitimately crumbling, I mean, where you could no longer rely on institutions to even be like a vector for progress,
Hmm.
then the opposite might be the case. It might be the case that at that point, any calls to policy are just kind of cope, and that the
Right.
only real change can be effected through the unfortunate and bloody process of social revolution. I don't think we're
Right.
at that point. It's just like a spectrum of what you think gets the most work done and what
Right.
causes the least harm.
And I think I would agree with that too, even like principally, because I think that there are absolutely times where violence is necessary. And that's kind of the line that I've set, at least during this discussion too, is just that if you have no other option, right? But in this case, we absolutely do have plenty of options outside of killing billionaires or whatever. I guess I know you also had a you didn't like that I was kind of both sidesing with the alt right stuff.
It's sometimes it felt a little bit like you did, but other times you were more clear because you said at times like, obviously there's a pretty big difference between encouraging stochastic terrorism against like minorities and doing so against billionaires, which I agree with.
Hmm.
But at other times it seemed like you were maybe more to the belief that those things were similar than I might be.
I got you. Yeah, I guess I mean I thought through it like a little bit more after I watched your thing, and I recognize how there are different consequences that could arise from that kind of normalization, right? So like obviously the alt-right memes is softening you towards a hatred and bigotry of minorities, right?
Right.
Whereas if we're talking about memes like this, I recognize that it's different, that it might not lead to someone killing like a wealthy person or something. I recognize that that's probably kind of a long shot at the end of the day. But the more I thought about it, the more I took another issue, and I want to know what your thoughts are on this. Um,
Mhm.
I feel like it could also be perceived as a bit hypocritical ultimately, because doesn't it kind of contradict the whole idea of being ruthless against systems, but being like empathetic to the people? Like, I feel like we could argue the flawed system, the lack of regulation on carbon emissions, the tax loopholes, the underfunding of the IRS, those flaws in the system have allowed for billionaires to exist in the way they do. So, does that seem contradictory?
I think so. I think 50% yes. Um, I don't think that there's a social necessity for to be like kind to billionaires in that respect, in the way the language of that sort of message normally implies. Mostly because when you're a billionaire, to an extent, you kind of are an avatar of the system. It's more about like oppose white supremacy, but don't be like a super elitist ivory tower dickhead about people who maybe have some like pernicious racist thoughts because of the way they were raised. Stuff like that,
Right, right, right.
or toxic masculinity. When it comes to billionaires, there's definitely a greater degree of immediate control over the systems that they benefit from. So that doesn't necessarily mean that it's all bets off when talking about them. It's more like, um, I think they're a little bit more sort of directly responsible for what's being addressed. That said, though, the goal should always be on like a systemic critique, because I mean,
I
like I
think I
said in
disagree. I think I disagree with that though, because I don't.
the systemic critique.
Well, no, no, no. I totally agree with the systemic critique, of course. I'm
Okay.
not sure how much are these billionaires responsible for the system. I mean, don't they like we've talked a little I think you mentioned even on your stream about like the demand, and there's a demand there for I'm again I don't want to sound like I'm blaming like consumers, but like they're not just pumping that shit in the air for fun. Like it is a side effect of them meeting a demand.
Of course, but at the end of the day, systems are just made up of people. Technically, the president is a person too, right? But you have to, if you're going to, blame a systemic problem, like for example with Trump, nobody would say like, be mean to systems, be kind to people with regards to Trump, because we would recognize that, like, as the president, he was essentially the system setter. He wasn't the entire administration, but I don't think it's unfair to hold him accountable for like the behavior of the administration.
But
And
I
likewise with a
agree with
billionaire.
that. Yeah, but how do billionaires control the? How do they set the system? Like, the president has more authority there. Where I feel like the billionaires, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm not thinking broadly enough. But I feel like with the billionaires, they are ultimately the way they are because of something they were able to achieve within the system. Like, unless they're doing some kind of illegal activity, right?
Yeah, sure. But I mean, the same goes with the president. Or I mean, if you want to be like hyperbolic, but nonetheless accurate about it, same with Adolf Hitler, really. Even the most pernicious behavior of individuals is ultimately shaped by the systems they grew up in and were influenced by. I mean, you could say Trump is symptomatic of fascism, and that to an
But
extent,
how are
the reason why.
billionaires? But how are billionaires directly responsible for like what in the system are they directly responsible for?
Well, it would largely be the influence they have through their behavior. Obviously, like billionaires is a broad term because there are a lot of them, and I'm not accounting for all behavior here. But if you took somebody like Jeff Bezos is one of the people most responsible for the standardization of the modern, like, commodity distribution systems that we've become accustomed to. Not just the incredible convenience of being able to order stuff online, which, hey, great. But the monopolization, the lobbying, the advocacy for smaller businesses to have their commodity distribution consolidated into Amazon, and then they get like delisted or the prices get changed in a sort of pray we don't alter the deal further type thing. Now, none of this is like Bezos with a remote control where he presses like the evil button or anything like that, but he certainly has way more control over the way things have played out than your like average cop would over police brutality or something like that. So while I'm not saying we should focus on the individual billionaires, because I mean Jeff Bezos would just be replaced with somebody else, and that
Right.
person could conceivably be far worse. I think it's also okay to at least express some enmity towards their behavior.
Oh yeah, I mean, I absolutely think like feeling, even if you like have some form of like resentment towards like the bourgeois, or like a discontent with the fact that like the wealth gap is so gigantic, like that's all fine. Like obviously those kind of feelings are going to push people towards advocating change ultimately at the end of the day. But I think it's just more like when it, like what I was talking to Shu about, like the guillotine meme, the meme specifically about like the violence towards this group of people, where it just seems so, I don't know, it seems contradictory to me about the system thing. I understand what you're saying though. I think I get what you mean with how they have more control over the system, but like they also, I guess I'm trying to think this through live at the same time. But
No, but I want to say though, because I think I know where your thoughts are going with this, and I want to say that I agree. I do think the guillotine memes are largely counterproductive, certainly with the type of analysis they encourage, because again, like that doesn't fix anything. You know Nathan Robinson, the current affairs editor who recently fired a bunch of people because they tried to establish a cooperative workplace?
I didn't hear about that.
Oh,
Shit,
big
that sounds
meme.
bad.
Big meme.
How have
Yeah.
I not heard
Now
of
this
this? Cool.
guy, it's pretty funny if you look at some. It's not funny, it's tragic, but you should look at some of it. Now, Nathan Robinson, I think this guy's a true blue socialist. I don't think this guy was making anything up. I don't think that he was a grifter. I don't think he was dishonest, but he was in control of current affairs. And even though for years he had championed the idea of cooperative workplaces, in what seems to have been a moment of panic, a desire to control his own work, he fired a ton of loyal staff simply for, well, trying to hold him to his values. And to me, this speaks obviously negatively of Nathan Robinson, but it also speaks to the point that I'm trying to make, I guess, with the people who take those guillotine memes seriously. It's not about the people at the top, it's the fact that there is a top. People will always act in their own self interest. The existence of the bourgeois isn't a crime because the bourgeois themselves are bad. It's because it's a distinction that shouldn't exist, like those between the monarchy and the peasantry. So you can do the guillotine memes all you like, but killing people doesn't solve the problem. All you do is cycle out the next group. And if you
Right.
don't want anyone to be cycled in, then you're not really looking to guillotine anyone. You're looking to dismantle the structure. But that doesn't make for funny memes. So,
Hmm. Okay. I mean, I can see. Yeah, I guess there is like a little bit of a disconnect from true solution. Obviously, there that goes without being said. Honestly, that there's a difference between memes and like true policy or how that's going to be enacted or whatever. But yeah, I think that makes sense. This is kind of on a side note, but it sort of goes along with this. I saw you talking about the Hasan thing, and
mhm.
personally, I really don't care at all that he got a house. Like to me, that does not matter to me at all. Um, but I felt like there were ways that you could argue for and against that as well, kind of in the same thing. Like, is there an argument to be made, you think, that like someone who talks so much against the system is like benefiting from the system? Like to that
um,
extent?
It doesn't bother me really. I tend to be pretty like lax about stuff like this because I think one of the big problems with socialist advocacy is that we have like no people in power. The biggest known socialists are academics, like the
Hmm.
people who push for it are like, they have like patches sewn into their coats and they get invited for like media fair talks where only people with like PhDs can listen because of the language they use. Unfortunately, wealthy people have a lot of media influence in our society, and that kind of goes both ways. So even if like I guess the optics of it are funny because Hassan like wears Eat the Rich shirts and then he's like rich, you know?
Hmm.
It doesn't really bother me. The thing that does bug me though is conspicuous consumption, like flaunting it sometimes. So one thing that bothered me was with not Pokimane, what was her name? The OK Boomer
Oh
girl?
yeah, the Nico someone or another.
Nico, yeah, her house tour and the Gucci sponsorship stuff, that stuff does bother me because that's not just being wealthy, which I don't necessarily have a problem with on its own. It's
Hmm.
flaunting it in a way that moralizes the wealth. And that's one of the big elements of conspicuous consumption, which is a big problem with how people frame their sense of self-worth, you know?
Hmm. Yeah, I can see that. Again, that's not even my argument with the Hassan thing. Like I said, I don't really care, and I think that there's a stronger argument to be made that like I mean, especially from I know because like your goal is to spread you want to spread leftism and like leftist ideas. So I think that you could argue very easily that Hassan also plays a valuable role in introducing people to leftist ideas and kind of plays a role in pushing them towards like deeper ideas. I
Yeah,
don't
he's
really.
great normie bait.
Yeah, that's what that's a good way of putting it. Normie bait. I don't watch a lot of Hassan. It's my understanding though that most of his content is pretty just like shallow, laughing at some memes, kind of. That's my understanding. I could be wrong. I'm not trying to insult the guy or
No, no, you're
anything.
totally right. He doesn't do deep analysis that much. It's like breaking news, he plays video games, he watches reality television, stuff like that, you know?
Right, like more of the relaxed kind of loose stream. Yeah, I'm trying to
And
think if
I
there's.
like that too, because I can't do that. That's not I can't be a normie bait for like 17 different reasons, but I think it's nice.
Yeah.
Sometimes the hypocrisy thing seems like something of a toothless criticism because like I don't see socialists saying it's not okay for people to have big houses, you know? It
Hmm.
always seems like it's people who aren't socialists calling it hypocrisy. You know, it's like, well, you're a
Right.
socialist, so you can't have a big house. But I don't I certainly haven't said that, so it's not hypocrisy by my standard. It
Right.
would be hypocrisy by the standard of a person who thinks that socialism is like the moral opposition to wealth or opulence, which
Right.
isn't what I think. I think that flaunting opulence sometimes can be bad, but that's definitely a contextual thing. And if Hassan
Yeah.
ever takes a Gucci sponsorship, then I guess I'll
You'll
I
have to.
guess I'll be upset about
You'll
that.
get on
Yeah.
the cancel Hassan train. Do you think there's an argument to be made about how I guess you can make the argument that under a market socialist system, Hassan's job would still exist, right? Like,
Yeah, it sounds so like um jerky to say. Like not jerky like mean, jerky like circle jerky. But on the whole, I feel like live streaming is a fairly generally non-exploitative way of accumulating wealth. It's all donos and ad revenue for the most part. It really just comes down to how you treat your editors, right? And I
mhm.
mean, people have complained about that with Hassan before, but in principle, I think that I legitimately I think that under market socialism, somebody like Hassan, as wealthy as Hassan, could still exist.
Right.
Maybe they'd be taxed way the hell more, but yeah, it seems like something that could still happen.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, I'm
Maybe
trying.
some people, by the way, there are leftists who like I'll say that they'll laugh at me because like, oh my God, he admits it, you know. Um, so this is definitely something that gets argued in lefty circles as well. I just like it
Yes.
when people are powerful and on the left. I think it's just generally good, you know?
Yeah, I saw the criticisms of Hassan. It's so weird. There was one tweet, I it was so funny and it described it perfectly. They were like, "I'm unsubbing from Hassan. I didn't know he was going to buy shit with that money." It's like I don't know. I thought it was pretty funny at the end of the
I
day.
would too. I mean, I think we all, you know, want nice things.
Right.
I don't know if there's much of a case to be made for utilitarian harm being done here. Maybe you could argue like I don't know. They did this with AOC and Bernie too, remember? Bernie's three houses, AOC's like nice dress.
I don't remember the
That time
AOC thing. I even did the Bernie House thing at the time, and now I kind of look back at him like I kind of did the meme.
the funny thing is that Bernie's a millionaire not because he like owns stock or whatever. I mean, he might, but the reason he has money is because of the book that he wrote explicitly advocating for progressive politics. And Hassan's money also came from explicitly advocating for progressive politics. So
Right, which
it
I think
seems
you can
like
argue that's an ethical way of making money.
definitely not the worst way.
Sure. I think the final disagreement I have that, and I saved the best for last because this is a huge disagreement I have with you, and
Oh, Oh no.
Honestly, I don't want to like go off guard. I don't want to go debate bro or bad faith on you or anything, but seriously, alcohol being better than weed.
Okay, hold on. This is ableism. Right off the bat, this is ableism, and you're getting canceled for this, okay?
How is this
I
ableism?
I have bipolar disorder, mister, okay? When I first started taking weed, when I started smoking the doobies, okay?
Uh-huh.
That shit was so cash. Um, but now, it is all it does is make me depressed whenever I smoke it. It's like super sad. But alcohol is always a happy time. I'm a happy boy when I drink alcohol.
Yeah, no, I think that I honestly think it just comes down to the individual at the end of the day, because for me, I don't know if you saw, I commented on your tweet, but I am the exact opposite. Every time I drink, I feel depressed. I feel like sick to my stomach, but then I use marijuana like super frequently. Also, I use it medically as well. So yeah, I don't know. It was funny because it was such a complete opposite.
Well, if we ever get around to hanging out, then you can smoke weed and I can drink, and we can hope that our energies match approximately under those circumstances.
And we'll
Do you
have to
mind if I?
stream it.
Oh, absolutely. Do you mind if I answer one person in your chat real quick in a very
Oh,
nice and non-confrontational way?
sure.
So Charles Bradley says, so millionaires good, billionaires bad is $999,999,990. Okay. So this is a very silly way of looking at things, Mr. Charles Bradley. Okay. It's not an essentialist critique of how much money people have. The problem is with the systems that lead to inequitable distributions of wealth. So if a person was exceedingly, absorbently rich, but they were a full advocate for progressive policies that I would support, it wouldn't really matter that much to me because their elevated voice, the increased media attention they would get just naturally by way of, being a very wealthy person, that would mean that they would be rather effective at spreading that voice. That'd be something that I would support. It's not about like judging people for being wealthy. It's about the systems that lead to that. So try to focus on that first and foremost, because I don't think that like I don't think that inherently billionaires are worse people than like poor people. I think that's a very essentialist critique, you know?
Yeah, that'd be like a Twitter lefty take.
Which I see plenty of. I talk a big game about, the lefty argument on this, but it's pretty clear from how people have been behaving on Twitter that there are plenty of leftists who disagree with my take on this too, you know?
Yeah. I don't know, it's weird. But
I think a lot of them are hypocrites too. I see some of these motherfuckers, like that Bay Area ML guy who's like a corporate lawyer who like does foreclosures or whatever, but he's like super performatively tanky or whatever. I see these motherfuckers.
I know it's
They're on the
funny
list.
because a lot of them are actually like wealthy or middle, like solid middle class, and like I don't know. But hey, man, I really
That's-
appreciate you coming on, and like I said, I really appreciated the analysis you did.
Yeah, yeah. So the only thing I want to say, by the way, just to be totally, totally clear, I don't think that the guillotine memes are productive. They just seem to be a component of class antagonism that it's kind of like a good and a bad situation where that stuff will always crop up as long as people are angry at the wealthy, which they have good reason to be given the state of things, at least as a class, not so much as individuals. So it'd be about like, how do you address that most effectively in ways that cultivate the good parts of the anger without exacerbating the worst parts, and that's like the constant balancing act, I guess.
And that's like the next conversation, and that's where I think we'd probably both agree too that it would be at least immediately pushing for any kind of policy, any kind of like regulation, closing tax loopholes and raising their taxes, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, especially since like what else do they think is going to happen? Like they'll be like, policy is unrealistic, we're past that point, what the fuck do you think you're going to do, like take down world capitalism? Who's being more unrealistic here, you know?
Well, yeah, it's that's any kind of argument like that is whenever it's like, well, too late to nothing can change now. That's just an instant tune out. Like, I don't know if you saw, but Dave Rubin said something on that. He was like, if climate change really is that bad, then there's nothing we can do about it, but we'll get off this rock. It's like, dude, what
Yeah,
are
the
you
climate denial to climate apathy pipeline. It's fantastic.
It is fantastic in a tragic way. Well, thanks so much for coming on, Vaush. Always a pleasure talking with you, man.
Yeah, have a wonderful stream, man, and take care.
Yeah, you too. See ya.
Bye.
Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and click the bell so you get notified when I drop a new video.